For this video, we're going to look at present or imperfective participles. So they're called present tense participles. The aspect is known, at least in Mounce's book, as imperfective. So we'll review the main participle functions and meanings. Then we'll review rules for forming present tense participles. And then we'll work through some examples of participles. So the participle functions, we have adjectival participles, and these often have definite articles, although not always. And under adjectival participles, we have substantival, and here's an example, ha pisteuon, the one who believes. And so you see the definite article, and then pisteuon comes from pisteuo, which means to believe, and then this is actually a substantive here, and it is referring to one who believes. The other way to use an adjectival participle is attributively. And so this is going to apply to a noun or a noun equivalent. We'll see an example later. Participles can also be used adverbially. So in addition to adjectival participles, we also have adverbial participles. And these never have a definite article. We say that they're adverbial because they work with a verb and they have an ing sense. So for example, using the same participle, pisteuon, if we use this with a verb, then it would have the sense of believing. So while believing, we gained much hope. I'm using the idea of believing with the verb we gained. While believing, we gained much hope. Or after believing, they were baptized. So the believing is being used adverbially along with the verb baptized. Forming the present tense participle, we start out with the present tense stem, and that's going to be the same as for indicative verbs. Then there's going to be a connecting vowel, omicron or epsilon. Then we'll see the participle morpheme. And so for active participles, this is going to be nu tau or usa for feminine. I'm highlighting that because it is quite different. For the middle passive, the participle morpheme is mena or mene, and that is actually very consistent and very helpful. Combined active, omicron plus nu tau is ant, and that would be for masculine and neuter, and it's going to remain usa for the feminine. And then finally, we form a present tense participle with a case ending. So we have present tense stem, connecting vowel, participle morpheme, and then finally the case ending. It's very important to realize that the endings for the active participles in the masculine and the neuter, we're going to have third declension endings. And then for the feminine in the active, we're going to have first declension. And then for the middle passive, in the present tense, we're going to have second declension endings for the masculine and the neuter, and then first declension for the feminine. Actually, we'll always have first declension for feminine, and that's a handy tip. But for the actives, third declension for masculine and neuter, and then for the middle passives, second declension for the masculine and neuter. And then the feminines are always first declension. So that's going to be important, and we'll take a look at that in just a minute in the chart. These are summarized in Mounce's textbook in sections 27.3 through 27.5. Let's look at some examples here. So we're in Mounce's 4th edition. We're looking at section 27.5. This is going to be some present active participles. Let's look at some key features here. So often it's easier to look at the genitive to figure out what's going on with a participle. So here we have the connecting vowel, the omicron, and then we have the participle morpheme, the nt, and then we have our third declension ending here, as. So we have luantas. Similarly, we have the omicron nu tau, all the way down. The only place where the ont doesn't appear is here for the dative plural, and that's because of the sigma. The sigma causes some changes to that ONT, and we end up with luusin. Let's come up and look at the nominative now. It's a little bit of an anomaly. Normally the case ending for a third declension would be a sigma, final sigma, but that doesn't get used in the nominative singular. So it's essentially irregular. So we'll get rid of that. So all we have is omicron nu tau, and then the tau drops off, and the omicron lengthens. So we get luon. Other than that, everything else is what you'd expect. So that's pretty nice. The neuter over here is also third declension. The neuter masculine singular has no ending, but in this case, the omicron doesn't lengthen. The genitive and dative are the same as the masculine. And then, as normally happens for the neuter, the nominative and the accusative are the same. Then we come down here to the plurals. The third declension endings a, on, sin, a. And so we just see those as you'd expect. And so again, for the neuters, the genitive and the dative are the same as the masculines. And then finally, the accusative is going to be identical to the nominative. So the neuters and the masculines are third declension with a little bit of funkiness up here for the nominative masculine singular. Now the feminines are a little bit of a different story. Remember we had usa as the particle morpheme, and then we have the pattern here where the nominative and the accusative have alpha, and the genitive and the dative have eta. So we see that for certain first declension nouns like doxa, the plurals are all normal. So looking at the singulars then, we just have a, ace, a, on, a first declension pattern. And then for the plurals, I, own, ice, as. This is what we typically see in first declension for feminines in the plurals. Now let's come down and look at section 27.10, and that is in mounts again. And these are the present middle passive participles. Notice the men with a connecting vowel. So amen in the middle of all of these. Amen, 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 and all the way down. And the same with the feminine. We've got the amen, amen, amen all the way down, and the same with the neuter. Amen, amen, amen. So these are actually pretty friendly. Now we have second declension endings here. So we have as, o, on, oi, own, ois, oos, exactly what we know from the second declension. And that's the same as the neuter second declension. So we have on, o, on, and then a, own, ois, a. Second declension. Those are the same as what we know from second declension nouns. And then the feminine is always first declension. We're just going to see the first declension again. And these are all going to be eta for the middles. So we're going to have a, ace, a, ain, I, own, ice, as. So these are much more friendly. This is what we're used to seeing for second declension in the masculine and neuter, and then the first declension in the feminines. Now this can seem very intimidating, but if you focus on learning the nominative and genitive singular forms, then that's all you really need to know in terms of filling out the rest of the table. For the present active masculines, the nominative singular is own, genitive singular ontas. For the feminines, the nominative singular is usa, genitive singular uses, and then the neuters, nominative singular on, genitive singular ontas. Similarly, for the present middle passive, You go through and you've got the masculines amanas, amanu, feminines amane, amanace, neuters amanan, amanu. So if you know these, you should be able to put together the rest of them. You may want to look at the dative plural because of the tau that drops out. But for the most part, what you see here is what you want to remember. So here are a few helpful hints for parsing participles. So if you see an aunt, so that would be omicron nu tau, or a sant, sigma alpha nu tau, plus a case ending, you're almost certainly looking at an active participle. Sant is aorist. We'll be looking at the aorist next. So the ONT is present or second aorist active, and the sant is first aorist active, and we'll see that when we get into the aorist. The next helpful hint comes with the men. We see a men in the middle of a verb, and then whatever comes after it, an omicron, omega, eta, alpha, plus a case ending, then we're going to be thinking middle at least, and in some cases middle passive. It will be middle passive for present tense, perfect tense, and second aorist tense, and it will be middle for first aorist. So if I see a men in the middle of a verb, I'm really thinking middle. And depending on the tense, it also might be passive. Let's look at some examples here. So we have pisteuon. We saw that before. This is a present active participle, nominative masculine singular, and it comes from pisteuo. So we have the stem, pistou, plus the connecting vowel omicron, plus the participle morpheme, nu tau, and then a null ending. This is an anomaly. Normally there'd be a third declension ending. This one just drops out. And so we get pisteuant, the T drops out, the omega lengthens, and we get pisteuon. Our next example is ekusa, and we see this usa, which is a good indicator we're looking at a feminine. So present active participle, nominative feminine singular from echo. And so we have ek, the stem, and then we have a connecting vowel. Mounts is not real consistent here. Sometimes he says that usa is the equivalent of omicron nu tau, and sometimes he says usa is the equivalent of nu tau. So in any case, usa is the participle morpheme or the combined participle morpheme with the vowel. And then for nominative feminine, we can say there's a null ending, although it's often easier just to say that it is an alpha. So we have ekusa, and that's a present active participle, nominative feminine singular. Our next one is legamenein. And so we have leg, that's our stem from Lego. Can pick that up pretty quickly. And then we have this nice men in the middle, which is telling me middle. This is a present tense stem. So it's present, and then the men tells me it's middle passive. And then I've got the ain ending, and that is going to be an accusative feminine singular. So looking at all this, we have leg plus a plus mene plus nu. It's often easier just to think of the accusative feminine singular as ain, eta nu, but technically the participle morpheme is mene. So this is a present middle passive participle, accusative feminine singular with that nice ain ending. Finally, let's look at akuantas. This is a present tense stem, and we have antas, and that is a genitive ending. So we have present active participle genitive, and it could be either masculine or neuter. The antas is third declension genitive singular, either masculine or neuter. So putting all that together, we have aku plus a plus the participle morpheme nu tau, and then the third declension ending as. So we have akuantas. So what is the meaning of the present participle? Well, in terms of aspect, the standard definition is that present participles have imperfective aspect. So the sense is inside the action. And that could be, for example, continuous action or repetitive action. Now, this definition obviously is subject to context. Let's look at a few examples from the Mounts workbook. And so this is from chapter 27 and number 2, and this is taken from Mark 1:14. Let's read it. Eilthen ha Jesus eistain Galilean, keruson ta euangelion to theou. We start out with eilthen, which is an aorist active indicative from erchomai, and then our subject is ha Jesus, Jesus. So Jesus came, and then we have eistain Galilean, into the Galilee, or into Galilee. We wouldn't translate the definite article. And then here is our participle, keruson. And so this looks like it's related back to the verb came. So he came, and then he came doing something. Keruson is a present active participle, and it is nominative masculine singular. And so it means proclaiming or preaching. So we say he's proclaiming, and then we need to figure out what he's proclaiming. So this is an example where we have an adverbial participle. Keruson is referring back to eilthen. He came proclaiming. Jesus came, eistain Galilean, into Galilee, keruson, proclaiming or preaching, ta euangelion, the good news or the gospel, to theou, of God. So this is a nice example of an adverbial participle. Let's look at the next one here from Romans 3:21. Nunida choris namu dikaiasune theou pephanerotai martyrumene hupa tu namu kaiton propheton. All right, so we have de nuni, but now, or and now, choris, without, namu, without law. This is the genitive object of the preposition choris. And then we have a noun here, dikaiasune, and this is the righteousness, and then we have theou, genitive, righteousness of God. And then we have a perfect finite verb. So pephanerotai. This comes from phino, which means to shine, or in the passive, to be revealed. And the tai ending telling me it's middle passive. So it is a perfect middle passive indicative, and then it's going to be third singular. So something is revealed here, and in the perfect it would be something has been revealed. And it's referring to the righteousness of God. Now, we have a participle here, martyrumene. Notice it has men, which is telling us middle, and possibly passive if it's a present tense. We have martyrumene. This comes from martyreo, and martyreo means to witness. So we have the contract vowel epsilon bumping up against the omicron connecting vowel, and that's giving us the contract u, omicron upsilon. So this is present tense. That's a present middle passive participle from martyreo. Looks like it's going to be passive here. And then the ending is an eta. So this looks like it's going to be nominative feminine singular. Now, what's that relating to? Well, we have a noun over here that is nominative feminine singular. This is the thing that is revealed. And we also have this participle that's nominative, feminine, and singular. So I'm strongly suspecting that we have an attributive relationship between these two. So what's happening here? We have this law of God revealed, and that law is being witnessed. So we have an adjectival participle, and it is acting attributively. So going through this, and now, apart from law, a righteousness of God has been revealed, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. Very important verse.